very first thing I like to do before I do any 3D modeling is creating a little sketch of my geometry. So for example, I got this picture right here of the AK-47 iron sight. I just pulled this off of Google Images, AK-47 iron sight. This is a high resolution image that I opened in a new tab. I'm going to copy that image and then I paste it into PaintNet, or you can use any other paint program on the planet. It's all the same shit. We just need the basic tools. So for example, I'm going to zoom in on this, and first I'm going to decide which area I'm going to work on first. Now generally when I'm working on something like this, I like to start from an area which has a very high level of detail, or an area which I think requires the geometry to be arranged in a very specific way to support those details. So for example, in this case, that's going to be this little hole over here. All the other parts are relatively simple shapes, at least on the main block here, but this is something where we're going to need very specific geometry. So I already know that I'm going to use a semicircle up here and then a little straight line, which is going to consist of a few edges. The question is, how many edges do we want to have on this semicircle? That's going to dictate how many edges we have on the full circle. I'm thinking we should go with 5 edges or 5 faces on top here, not for any particular reason other than that that is the minimum number of edges that you need in order to create a semicircle which looks nice and smooth under the influence of a subdivision surface modifier, which I do intend to use. Then also, to keep everything nice and clean, I'm definitely going to direct this face loop which flows up here underneath the other part of the hole, which is down here at the bottom. So this is going to be a loop that goes all the way around this hole, and then I'll use the edges from the side here to extrude this little face over here. And then the other thing we have to point out before we continue is that I want to have at least 2 segments over here on this side, because one face would be very long and thin, and those faces are going to flow in this direction and hopefully continue all the way to the end of this surface right here. I might be able to make that flow back here and then up like this, but I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that. But the main thing here is we need to have very consistent geometry on this edge to allow for the creation of this little quarter of a circle, or a quarter pipe if you will. And then that geometry has to allow us to create a little circle which is going to be over here. And of course there is another quarter pipe over here on the front, so that's just something we have to keep in mind. Now these parts might look complicated to you, but believe me, these parts are probably the easiest. So now that we got that out of the way, now I feel a little bit more comfortable starting this 3D model. I'm probably still gonna fuck it up. I'm just letting you know that this is something that I have to do for myself before I can start creating the 3D model. It's a little bit easier once you have an idea of what you're doing. And another thing I want to mention to you before we start the tutorial is that I spent a good 2 hours trying to figure out the right way to do this. So I already tried making this video before, but I fucked it up, so I had to delete that. If you guys want, I can put that deleted footage up on Patreon so you guys can see me suffer. But anyway, I'll show you what I managed to come up with. And by the way, somebody told me this thing looks like Saddam Hussein's hiding place. So I pulled up a background image of the AK-47, which I found to be not very useful in this case because this iron sight is barely visible there. But I started by creating the top of this little circle over here. So I clicked right there, Shift A, mesh, give me a circle. I would align that circle with my view, and like I said, we want to have 5 segments on top of this little semicircle hole, which means this whole circle has to have 10 vertices. And of course, by default, that is aligned in a way where you have 1, 2, 3, 4 edges on top, and then you have 2 over here on the sides. At the top and the bottom you have a vertex when we're supposed to have an edge. So we have to rotate this by 90 degrees, and then we extrude that and we scale it up to create that little face segment. And if you look at the reference images here, you can try to kind of figure out how thick this little bridge up here is supposed to be. It seems to me that the thickness of that bridge is almost the same as the diameter of this circle, which is quite interesting. And it also seems that this outer circle is supposed to be a little bit wider. So I think we're supposed to do something like this. We're supposed to scale it up on the x-axis a little bit. Then we have to make this lower part down here, so we're going to delete 1/2 of this little circle. Take 2 vertices from here, we're going to extrude that downwards, and these 2 edges need to be subdivided because, like I said, we want to have 2 edges here. And then down here for the bigger circle, we are also going to use a circle which has 10 edges. Now I can explain to you why I want this circle to have 10 edges. It's because we're going to have to delete this vertex on the top, or rather these 2 edges at the top. And let me try to demonstrate this to you. If I connect this first, of course I have to get really close if I want to connect this. I'm going to zoom all the way in and be very careful about this. If I use my subdivision surface modifier, which you don't have to use by the way if you're trying to keep this shit low poly, I don't care about the polygon count, I just want to make sure that this looks pretty. So I am going to use a subdivision surface modifier. But when we use a subdivision surface modifier, naturally these vertices over here also become smooth, and I don't want that. I need those to be sharp. So later on I'm going to sharpen those, which sort of creates this weird deformation. It's no longer a perfect circle, and that's just because of how the subdivision surface modifier behaves. You can see that it makes this edge go upwards and not inwards as it should if it was a full circle. Now 10 edges is the minimum number of edges we need to make this look reasonably nice. If we had something like 8 edges, then this deformation would be a lot more visible and it wouldn't look very nice anymore, and I can try to demonstrate that to you here as well. So here's a circle with 8 vertices. If we extrude this up like so, and we add the subdivision surface modifier and we extrude this inwards, you can clearly see it doesn't look like a circle at all. It looks more like a bowl. In fact, if you have a circle with 8 vertices and it's under the influence of a subdivision surface modifier, you're also going to notice that it's not a perfect circle, and you can test that by adding a second circle which has something like 512 vertices. Well, it's pretty damn close. It's effectively the same shit, so I just made myself look stupid, but whatever, let's keep moving. Anyway, I will also add that I've tried doing this before with a circle that has 16 vertices, 14 vertices, 12 vertices, 8 vertices. None of it worked. None of those numbers of vertices allowed me to create the kind of shapes that I wanted to create on the other parts later on. It was very difficult to manage that geometry, and that's the part that made me have to delete this shit and start over again. So sometimes it's just trial and error like that. You waste a whole day doing something which is a complete waste of time when you think about it, but that's what it takes sometimes to get a good 3D model, so fuck it. So then I went down here and I placed my cursor into the middle of this circle. I extruded these vertices out like this, and then I filled them with these vertices up here. Now of course in here we have 3 edges, which means we also have to have 3 edges out here, which means we need 2 loop cuts, and once we add those 2 loop cuts, we're going to go to edge select mode, W bridge edge loops, and that's going to help us fill in this shape properly. Now the next step is going to be using this little loop to create the rest of the shapes we got going on here. So for example, if you take a look at this line right here, and if you would imagine that it continues to go in that direction, it connects somewhere just above the middle of this circle. That's my opinion anyway. And that line is at the bottom of this little slope, which starts at the same level as this line right here, and that seems to be around the same level as the top of this semicircle, but my geometry is a little bit different here. I don't want to change that right now, so again, fuck it. I'm going to use these 3 edges here to extrude that little slope part, and I'm going to scale it up on the x-axis. It has to be very short over here at the top and a little bit longer down at the bottom, so it's going to be something roughly like this. And then we have to take care of this face segment over here and where it's going to flow. I'm thinking it should go around here and up, so I'm going to place my cursor back in the middle, take all this geometry from over here, extrude that up like this, fill these 2 edges. Now it's moving in that direction, and I'm going to use that to create this surface up here. So you can see we got a straight line, which is just a continuation of this line on this side, so we can just extrude this out to somewhere around here. We're going to subdivide that once so we can connect those 2 vertices. And the really important part that we have to keep in mind here, so much that we can't even continue before we consider this, is the shape of this quarter pipe and the number of edges we have to have there. Now the first thing we got to do is recognize that that quarter pipe starts up here and ends down here in the middle of this hole. I'm pretending like it's exactly a quarter of a circle. I don't think it's that. I think the shape is slightly deformed, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, we place our cursor to a point which is an intersection between this edge over here at the top and this edge which is in the middle of this circle, and that point seems to be right between these 2 vertices up here. So we place our cursor there. We might even place the vertex there just so we can save this point for later, and this is going to be the center of this circle, which is going to create the quarter pipe later on. So this is where we're going to extrude around, but let's not do that just yet. First, let's use this geometry to get down to the floor here. We're going to extrude these 2 edges, and then these 3 edges over here are going to be used to create this little surface, and we're going to extend that all the way to the back there. So we just extrude them out a little bit. We scale them to 0 on the x-axis. We bring them to around here somewhere, which is going to be the middle of the flat part. Then we extrude them one more time, and then we can extrude them again, and at this point they're supposed to start going downwards. So let's just leave that here for now. We're going to take care of that later. First, let's do something about this part here. Now we have these 4 edges over here which we have to connect into this edge, which are also going to connect into this quarter pipe. But if we add 3 new vertices over here, that gives us 4 edges, and then we have 4 edges up here at the top, and that's also not bad, because if we extrude these outwards like this towards the quarter pipe, now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges in the quarter pipe, which means the full circle would have a total of 24 edges, and that's a pretty nice number. Now the only problem is I'm not too happy with how this geometry here is, because it's all stretched out. We have very long faces here, and I'm not too happy about that, so we're gonna clean it up a little bit. Now first of all, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We first have to make a proper quarter pipe, so we said we're gonna use this point right here. So I'm going to place my cursor onto that point. I'll take this vertex from the bottom. I'm gonna use my spin tool, Alt E spin. By the way, I just realized I didn't have my screencast keys turned on this whole time. If you guys want me to tell you what shortcut I used at a particular moment, just let me know down below. And we're gonna set the angle here in the spin tool to -90, so it goes in this direction, and we said we wanted 6 steps. So 6 steps it is. We just have to figure out how we're going to connect this in a much nicer way. So first of all, loop tool space, that gives us us a big abomination of a shape. Down here we're going to straighten this out so it points downwards so we can connect it to this edge. We're going to do something similar with these vertices over here, so we're just going to move them in this direction. But we can't have all this because this is terrible, so instead I figured we can push these two edge loops to the side here. So W loop tool space just to make sure that these edges are nice and clean. So to push this up to the end here, I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 new edges there, and those 4 new edges I'm going to be able to connect with these edges out here. So W bridge edge loops, loop cut down here so we can connect these vertices, and of course we have to make this straight, so we're going to use our knife tool right there. And now to fill this part down here, here's what we're going to do. First we start with a little triangle. That triangle is going to be turned into a quad because we can't have any triangles, we want quads only. And we add a loop cutter here, we scale them up just a little bit, we extrude this part out. Of course we line that up with the top as well, and then we just need 2 loop cuts. We fill up this side, we fill up the other side, and there we go. Now we can just play around with the position of these vertices here just to make everything flow a little bit more nicely. As you can see now, it looks all busted up and uneven, but if you spend some time playing around with that, it's going to look nice and clean like mine over here. Now guys, if you want to learn a little bit more about the tools and techniques which you see me using in these videos, I understand some of these things are probably quite high level and difficult to follow, especially if you're a beginner. I got my very own course, it's called the Blender Masterclass course, and in that course I explain every single tool and technique which I ever use for 3D modeling in Blender. So that's going to help you understand how and why I do the things I do inside of Blender, and it's designed to be a beginner friendly guide, so even if you're a complete beginner, you're going to be able to follow that course. So check that out, there's a link in the description. Now let's get back to work. So now I want to move back here and do the thing that I told you about earlier. I want to make this little slope. So let's just do that one more time. We're going to extrude this out, and I'm going to use my active element as the medium point so I can bring this edge over here from the top to the bottom. And this geometry at the bottom I'm going to turn into a triangle by dissolving this edge. Well, it's not a triangle, it's a quad, but it's a very long one and has a very weird shape. Normally the way you handle these situations is you just add an extra vertex here, you slide it out, and now the quad is not necessarily problematic, but it's also not very well organized. So instead we're going to add a knife cut back here. That's going to create a little triangle here at the bottom, and then of course you turn that little triangle into a and then of course we turn that little triangle into a quad using a loop cut. So we're going to scale that vertex out just a little bit, and we join this here with J to make an edge here, and just for the sake of geometric consistency we're going to add a couple of loop cuts like this, and there we go. Now everything is much better. Now we can use this geometry here to create the next part, which is this little bump back here. I think this segment here should have been a little bit thinner, so we should have slid this up while we had the chance like this, and then that will create a nicer shape back here. So if we join this with J to straighten it out, now we got to clean everything up manually. So we're going to go back to our active element, place the cursor down here, use this edge segment, snap it down there, make a knife cut between this vertex over here and this one up here, and then delete the extra geometry, and there we go. Now that's going to be a little bit better hopefully. And then we take this edge here from the back, we extrude that out. First we have one edge at the bottom, then we extrude it out one more time, and that's going to create this little surface in the back here. Now I'm not sure how long that's supposed to be, I'm not sure that this background image is very accurate, and with the subdivision surface modifier this is going to look nice and pretty. As you can see, that curve looks pretty much the same as this one here. Of course, if you don't want to use a subdivision surface modifier, you're not going to do it like this. Instead, you're probably just going to have a little bit more geometry here to get that shape like this. In fact, if you're not using a subdivision surface modifier, then you might as well just turn this entire thing into an ugly engon, and in that case this tutorial is a complete waste of your time. But since I'm a gentleman, I do care about my topology, so I am going to maintain some geometric consistency, and I'm also going to make this a lot nicer by doing this. Check this out. I want to make these edge segments here completely straight, and to do that I first have to bring this vertex forward a little bit, and then I can use my loop tools down here to make all these edges straight. So I do loop tool space, and there we go. That's beautiful. Now let's move on to the next part, which is going to be creating this little surface over here on the front. So before we do that, first of all I want to make sure that all the edges down here on this lower segment are roughly the same length, and as you can see we have an edge over here which is much longer than the others. So I'm thinking it would be nice to just do a knife cut over here on the z-axis, do the loop cut thing here one more time, join it with this one, and now it's a little bit better. We could use our loop tools to take this all the way to make them completely even and straight loop tool space, but as you can see then you got a lot of cleaning up to do. So now we would have to take all this geometry, would have to scale it backwards a little bit with the 3D cursor when it's placed up here at the top. We got to pull all this backwards as well. We would have to manually straighten things out by lining them up with the geometry down here at the bottom. I'm acting like I'm not going to do that, but I'm definitely going to do that no matter matter how much time it takes. Maybe it's because I'm autistic and I like to have my shit clean. So I'm going to use a couple of knife cuts over here to straighten this part out. And then since I know that all of these are exactly the same length because we applied the space tool there, then I just have to make these on top here straight as well using the G-stretch tool. So I select this entire edge segment, W loop tools G-stretch, and once we do that on all the edge segments, then it's going to look nice and clean again. Now we do still have to fix this part in the back, so we have to move this forwards a little bit. We have to line everything up. I'm just going to do all that manually, and once we do that manually, now we got a nice and clean mesh. So now we are ready to take this edge segment from the bottom and extrude it outwards. Guys, just to be clear, we're not going to need all of these edge segments here. We're definitely going to be able to dissolve some of them later. It's just that now I want to keep everything a nice grid, sort of like you would in a mathematics notebook, just to keep everything nice and organized. I'm going to need these edges for some of the geometry down here later on, and then the ones that I'm not going to need, I'm going to be able to dissolve pretty easily. So anyway, we just extruded this outwards a little bit, and by the way, I'm definitely going to have an extra loop cut here. You're going to see why later on, but for now, I have to take this edge segment from the bottom. We're going to extrude that down, and this is where we have these little things cut out of this corner. So should we start with the cool one or the easy one first? Let's do the easy one first. They're both pretty fucking cool. Check this out, guys. This is the type of shit that's going to increase your IQ score. If you have children and you want to make sure that they're intelligent and not fucking idiots like everybody else, you make sure they're not scrolling TikTok all day. Maybe you make them do some hard surface modeling with RE and 3D over here. Well, maybe that's not gonna work because of all the cussing and all the bullshit, but anyway, you understand what I'm trying to tell you. Anyway, look, we're gonna do this next. We're gonna take one edge here, we're going to delete it, X delete vertices, because that's going to delete these two vertices, and when you delete a vertex, it also deletes all the faces and edges connected to it, which leaves us with this great big hole. And now we want to place our cursor between these two vertices. Now check this out. It's like a little quarter of a sphere is cut out here. So we need a semicircle down here and a semicircle down here. And guess what? If we have a semicircle down here, we're gonna have to connect it with these edges. And how many edges we got here? We got 5 fucking edges. So up here, right between these two vertices, we're going to add a circle which has 10 vertices, because 10 is 2 times 5, or rather half of 10 is 5. And we got this circle right here with the cursor in the middle. We take these vertices on this side, we're going to rotate them around the x-axis, and then we can just fill this here. We fill this with a face, and we take this edge, we fill the rest. For some reason it stops here, but we just keep going over here at the top, and there you go, we got this little piece cut out. Now here's the coolest part. We have to fill the inside, and to do that you're going to first fill this here with a little triangle, and then just add a loop cut down here. You're going to use the 3D cursor to scale this up to turn it into a nice clean quad. If this is just a straight edge, then this is something called a concave face, or a concave polygon, or whatever the fuck. It is concave, meaning that it has an inner angle which is 180 degrees or more, and that's no good. That's going to cause you all sorts of problems. You want to try to avoid that whenever you can. That's why we just scale this up a little bit. And then here we also need an extra vertex on the inside, so we duplicate this one, we rotate that by 45 degrees, and we just fill this with a couple of faces. We place the cursor in the middle, we take these faces, we duplicate them, we scale them to -1 over the x-axis, and we fill these two faces, and there we go. How beautiful is that? Now of course this is going to be a little bit smaller, so we just place the cursor here, take these faces and scale them down. And part of the reason I said we're going to have an extra loop cut up here is because I don't want to have these long faces. Instead, I want to take this geometry and bring it a little bit closer so our faces are not that long. If you're wondering why I don't want to have any of these long faces here, or why concave polygons are no good, or why I do any of this crazy topology shit that I'm doing over here right now, you can check out my free topology guide. There's going to be a link for that in the description. It's completely free. You don't got to pay nothing, and it's going to explain all the basics of topology, which you really need if you want to get good at hard surface modeling. And yes, that free guide is designed to sell you my fucking ebook, but like I said, you don't gotta buy nothing, so you can just check it out for free so you can follow these tutorials a little bit better. So now we're gonna move back here where we need to create this other shape, and that's also going to be pretty easy. Now first of all, this object is way too long. It's only supposed to be maybe about this long, maybe even less than that, and this shape is supposed to go up until, let's say, here somewhere, probably even less than that, but it doesn't really matter. We're gonna take these edges here, Control B to bevel them, and as you can see, that already kind of gets us to where we want to be. But we don't want to push this all the way out to the next vertex. We don't want it to collide with this one. We want to keep a little edge between the tip and the last vertex, and you're gonna see why. Well, I'll tell you why. That's because it's going to allow us to create an extra loop cut here, which we can connect with this vertex. and that's going to leave us with a quad here because we have an extra edge there. And that quad that we're going to have there is going to be essential in controlling the loop flow and maintaining good topology. This is what I meant when I said this is some high IQ shit, guys. Nobody likes hard surface modeling, but you do have to be intelligent, and it's definitely postponing Alzheimer's if you're doing this on a regular basis. So now we place the cursor over here, and we're going to select these faces from the back. S to scale, Shift X to exclude the X-axis from the scaling operation because we don't want to scale it in that direction. We just want to scale it in these two directions like this. So we just play around with that a little bit to get the right shape here. We're going to scale up another one like this. And now we got a little triangle here, so we add a loop cut here. We scale this vertex up. If you wanted to make this part curved here, you could take this edge segment here, you could scale that up as well. And with the subdivision surface modifier, that would look a lot more beautiful than it does right now. Or if you wanted to, you could also add some extra geometry like this using loop cuts if you want to deal with that shit, but I don't want to do that. And my shape is just supposed to be straight, so I'm going to keep it like this. And now here's the crazy part. You remember how I said we need to keep this extra little edge here? Currently this is an n-gon. If we didn't have this extra edge, we would have a quad here, and this face segment here would flow up like that, and it would end up God knows where, and that doesn't really help us control the edge flow. Instead, we leave an extra little edge here so that we can take these edges from the front here, we can tear them with V and bring them forward. How far? Well, we want to bring them right in the middle, so we're going to place the cursor there first and take these edges and align them with the 3D cursor. And then we add a loop cut here, and we can join these two vertices with J. And now you're going to see how well this behaves if we just add an extra loop cut back here. If we select this face loop, look, it just goes straight along this edge, and we can control it very easily. Now we just have to fill these faces back here, and of course we're going to do the same thing down here at the bottom. Although I'm going to do something else first, which might be retarded, but I do feel the need to do it. I'll place my cursor here, and I'll take this vertex and rotate it by -90 degrees. That's just going to help me make sure that the edges on this side have the same length as the edges up here. So I have my 3D cursor here with which I can align this edge segment at the bottom, and then again we find the middle. We take these vertices here, we lift them up by aligning them with the 3D cursor, loop cut there, join these two vertices with J, loop cut here, cursor down here, and extrude this and bring it down. And another thing we can do to make this here a little bit prettier is just bring these vertices a little bit closer, or at least lift them up a little bit so we have this nicer shape at the bottom. Or maybe we just slide this edge down and we slide this edge backwards a little bit. So as you can see, when we change the position of these vertices, it sort of makes this little circle around this shape, and that just seems like the transition between a straight line and a semicircle is a little bit more gradual, and it makes everything look a little bit cleaner. It's definitely not necessary in this situation, but it is something a professional would do. You know, people say Aryan's not professional because he cusses in his videos. Did you know that Aryan got invited to a big fucking job because he was cussing in his videos and somebody liked it? Anyway, now check this out. Up here, we're going to place our cursor back onto this little vertex. This was the middle of this circle up here, and we take these vertices from the corner. Well, never mind that, because my idea was to extrude this and scale it up, but I'm trying to align them with this vertex down here, and that's just not necessary. When I can go to side view, I can take these two edges over here, Alt E, spin, angle is going to be -90 degrees. We need 6 steps, and there we go, that's all taken care of. Now I changed my mind because I just looked at my old reference over there, and we only have one face segment going this way. The next one goes all the way here to the end. I don't remember the reason for that. It was something to do with the number of vertices we're going to get for this circle. So I'm going to delete these 3 faces, then these down here at the bottom I'm going to align with the edge segment at the bottom. These I'm also going to scale down a little bit, and here I also want to clean this up a little bit. As you can see, I'm trying to make them a continuation of whatever's going on back here. So I don't want this to be all crooked up here. I want it to kind of flow nicely. You see what I'm talking about? We want everything to be nice and organized and beautiful. And then this is where the magic happens, because now we're going to create this circle over here. But before we can do that, we have to create this bevel at the end here. So let's take this vertex, we're going to push it down here, place the cursor onto that vertex, take this vertex over here at the top, and here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we're going to take this edge segment and push it to the end, although I think the end is supposed to be a little bit further back if we look at this image and not the background image. And we're going to have 2 loop cuts here, and then the idea is we have 3 edges at the bottom, 3 edges here, and if we have another 3 edges here, that's going to allow us to create a circle with 9 vertices. That is simply the best that I could come up with in my 2 hours of trying to do this that I was bitching about at the beginning of the video. So anyway, we use this point here for the spin tool on this vertex, Alt E, spin, angle is going to be 90 degrees, steps is going to be 3, and we align this end with this vertex at the top here. Then we just got to make sure that this is nice and pretty so we can turn it into a circle. For example, we got to lift this up. Obviously we can't have this looks fucking ridiculous, so we're going to have to bring some of these vertices up a little bit. I don't want to have a change in the slope of this curve back here, so I can't just suddenly start bringing it up like this. You see it's going going downwards and it shoots up. So instead we're going to try to do this. We're going to take these 3 edges over here, W loop tools G stretch, and we're going to reduce the influence. So we're going to set that to about 50%. As you can see, that just makes this edge segment a little bit more straight, which means I can lift this vertex up a little bit more. We can do something similar back here, loop tools G stretch, and as you can see, that allows me to bring this up a little bit as well. Or maybe I'm just trying to sound smart, because that doesn't really work out too well, because it ends up making everything look like shit. We can't do the same thing down here, but you understand my idea here. We're supposed to take these edges and extrude them inwards, W loop tool circle. We rotate that circle to make sure we don't get any weird stretching, and there we go. Now we got a little circle here. That circle is visible on other pictures of this AK-47 iron sight. For example, if you look at this side, you can see there's some sort of rivet there. I don't know what that does. It's not my job to know this. I don't shoot people, I just make the guns in Blender. So now the hardest part is over, and we're just gonna have to fill in the top surface here. Make a couple of other things like this little object up here, which is the actual iron sight that you look through. Anyway, let's move on to that next. Now this part over here at the top where we're adding some thickness to this wall is pretty simple. It's just 10 seconds of work. We just take some of these edges, we extrude them inwards a little bit, then we deselect a couple of these, we extrude this a little bit further, and then my subdivision surface modifier makes this part look a little bit round like in the reference image. By the way, beware, there are different types of AK-47 iron sights. This one here has a long flat surface right before this bump, whereas the reference image that I was using this whole time has a short platform here. Then it goes down, it becomes flat again, and it's something totally different. Just keep that in mind. I decided to go with this one down here because I think it looks way better. Anyway, I'm not trying to sit here and talk to you about the basic shit for 2 days. I think everybody knows how to extrude stuff inwards and add a little bit of thickness to this and fill in the top surface. I don't think I need to explain that to you. What I want to focus on next is this part right here where we got the numbers and shit. This is for the zeroing. So if you're shooting at somebody 500 meters away, you're gonna have to change this to adjust the iron sight. I imagine this is probably very similar to the way you adjust a piece of artillery when you're trying to bomb some children on the other side of town. You use a device which is similar in principle to this one right here. Well, the IDF probably has higher tech than that, but you guys understand what I'm trying to tell you. So I don't have a top view blueprint, so I don't really know the exact proportions. We could set this up using F-Spy. If you guys want, let me know down in the comments. I can tell you how we can use this perspective distorted image as a background image so we can get exactly the right proportions, even though it's not a blueprint. Just let me know down below if anybody's interested in seeing a video about that. But now we're going to add a little plane right in between these two objects, which are currently mirrored by the mirror modifier, and we're going to bring this up until around here somewhere. Then we're going to extrude it further and bring it all the way to the end, which is around here somewhere. And these two edges we're also going to extrude and push outwards a little bit like this. As you can see, we have some sort of a bevel going on here. Now we have to be careful with the topology because we're supposed to have some sort of a bevel here. So X dissolve faces to turn everything into one face. We're going to take these two vertices, bevel them with Control B and V. I want to have a bevel here that looks something like this. I think probably it's supposed to be a little bit bigger. So using my 3D cursor, I can make that a little bit bigger like this. And now here's how we're going to handle the topology. First, I'm going to select this edge segment. I'm going to fill it with F. I to inset, then O for outset. That's going to create an edge segment or face segment around this face on the inside. Then delete that face, and now we have these faces here. For the sake of geometric consistency, we can add a couple of loop cuts here. And I'm also going to add another loop cut to the back here, which I'm going to align with this point right here. 3 more loop cuts back here so we can join these vertices like so. And now I want a vertex here, which I'm going to join with this one, another one here for this one. Then give me a knife cut along the y-axis like this. 2 more loop cuts right here for these 2 vertices, and there we go. Now we clean that up quite well. Not really, that looks pretty fucked up. Let's use our 3D cursor, tear this part. We're going to line that up with the 3D cursor. Bring this back, bring this vertex down. Well, to be quite honest with you, the way we should have done this would have been the following. We add a plane which we subdivide a couple of times until we get something like a surface like this. We select something like this. That's a 6x6 W loop tool circle, and then we get rid of the circle. We delete everything except 1/4, and then that quarter we're going to use as that little corner, and we extrude everything else from there. So let's just place the 3D cursor down here, delete this object, bring this one down, and then we use that to create everything else. So bring this here to the middle, take these edges and extrude them backwards. backwards. Take the edges from the front and extrude them forwards like this, or well, that's backwards, but it doesn't matter. And now again, we have to have our geometry arranged in a way that it allows for the creation of this little semicircle, which goes on to create this sort of gap that we have here. So in a perfect world where we employ geometric consistency all the way, I add like 42 loop cuts here, then I add something like, I don't know, what's that, 5 loop cuts right there, another 20 fucking loop cuts down here to turn everything into little squares. And then once we do that, we can mirror this to bring it over to the other side, and those beautiful little squares are going to allow us to create what we're trying to create, which is the following. Over here on the front, taking something like, over here on the front, we take something like a 4x4 surface, because that goes straight through the middle. W loop tool circle, we delete that circle, and then we also delete everything on the right of that circle like this. So this entire area back here we're going to get rid of. So select those faces, get rid of them, place the cursor up here, select this edge segment, extrude, right click, scale to 0 on the Y. Same thing down here at the bottom. Then over here we place the 3D cursor between these two vertices and we fill this area with F. We go up here to mesh, edit mode, overlays, and we check edge length. The numbers are black, the background is black. I can't see what it says, 1.48 or whatever, 1.45. Okay, that is going to be the width of the cube which we're about to add here. And why are we about to add a cube? Well, I'm going to show you. So this is 0.145, assuming that the scale is applied. The scale is not applied, so first we have to apply the scale, otherwise this is not realistic. So once you apply the scale to this object, it's 0.0506. That's supposed to be the size of this cube here, 0.0506. Now that perfectly matches the width of this gap, although that was completely unnecessary because we're about to use a subdivision surface modifier, which is going to change the size of the cube. And we want 2 levels. We're going to apply that, add modifier, deform, cast. We're going to set the factor to 1 and apply it. That makes this into a perfect sphere. Every time I use this technique for creating a quad sphere, there's always some arrogant scumbag in the comments acting like he knows better than me, acting like I'm the idiot for not using his favorite technique, which is subdividing a cube and using Shift Alt S to turn that into a sphere. And he's trying to act like this is the same thing, but the difference between me and him is that he is a retard and I am not. So if you just use your eyes and compare these two objects, you can clearly see that the geometry is not the same on them. For instance, the difference in edge length around the equator is clearly much greater here than over here. It's still not perfect, so I would still use the loop tool, space tool, or maybe it would be better to use the loop tool, circle tool in this situation since we are dealing with a circle. But I don't want to hear nothing about any Shift Alt S technique anymore from now on. So we place the sphere back over here into the hole. We got to make sure it's exactly in the middle, and then once we place it in the middle, we have to scale it exactly right. As you can see, the circle tool seems to have fucked up our object, so we are going to have to fix that. And to fix that, we'll delete this segment, we'll take the vertex from the top and we're going to rotate it by 90 degrees around one of the axes, connect this with the corresponding vertices above and below, and then take these edges over here, Alt E spin. We're going to set the number of steps to, what's that going to be, 16. Well, that doesn't work properly, so we're just going to have to bridge these edge loops like this manually. And now we can match the size of the sphere with the size of this semicircle below. And then once we do that, we make sure that these are part of the same object. We delete the top part of this sphere, we delete the other half of this hemisphere down here, which we don't need. We merge our vertices by distance, make sure that this is connected, and then we just have to fill this area over here. Now of course we're not going to need this many edges, so let's select one of these edge segments, select loops, edge rings. You can easily get rid of most of these, not all of them but most of them. So we're just going to dissolve a whole bunch of them, and then later we're going to add some more just for slightly better consistency. And now we might even be able to use the grid fill tool to fill this in. So check this out. If we close this frame up, and of course if we make sure that this object is symmetrical, not just symmetrical but symmetrical over the x-axis, well, over the x-axis but on the y-axis. I don't know, I'm not a mathematician. Delete one side, take this side, duplicate it, bring it over to the other side, and now we take this frame right here, face grid fill. As you can see, it immediately figures out exactly how we want this filled, and then we just create this beautiful shape in the back, which I've been looking forward to this whole time. So you extrude this up, you push it backwards, you extrude it backwards a little bit more, then we take this and we extrude it downwards, then we extrude it down again and we push it forwards. And at this point, I guess we just line it up with this piece over here, and down here we're going to have a surface which is exactly the same as this one up here, except probably without this little trench here. And of course we're going to need some loop cuts so that we can create this shape right here, which means first we need a loop cut here, which we're going to align with this edge segment, because then if we add a couple of loop cuts over here to create squares, we can add the same same number of loop cuts in the back here, and if we look at this from side view, these loop cuts are going to be perfectly aligned with each other, which just means we can take a couple of faces like this, or you know what, better yet, we can use our boolean modifier here. So we place the 3D cursor over here, shift A, give me a cylinder with 16 vertices, align it with my view, make it just slightly bigger than a 2x2 surface on the background, scale it up on the x-axis, add modifier, generate boolean, target the cylinder. Of course, we're going to delete the upper half of this cylinder, and then we're going to take everything like this and extrude it upwards, fill this, fill this, fill this, apply the boolean modifier, get rid of this, and then we just do a little bit of boolean cleanup down here to make sure everything is nice and pretty. And as you shall see in a second, the result is now going to be gorgeous. And then the only real thing still left for us to do is to create these little cylinders on the side. This is the part you press when you want to adjust zeroing. So I'm going to go to side view, I'll place my cursor exactly into the middle of this slab, and then shift a mesh, give me a circle which you're going to align with my view, scale him down because I want to get an idea of how many vertices I'm supposed to have here. So I want to have a nice smooth circle which is not too large, so it has to be approximately this size, even smaller than that. I think something like this would do it. No, that's not right. Look at my background image, it's supposed to be way bigger than that. Anyway, it doesn't matter, let's make it roughly like this. And I want to have vertices very close to the surface, so I'm going to try turning this up to 24. Not good enough, let's do 32. Still not good enough. As you can see, these are inside now, so there's a big gap between the next one and the surface. So let's try 48 vertices, 64 vertices. Fuck me, let's try 50. Well, 42 seems to work perfectly, so we're gonna go with 42. We're gonna delete this little gap here. Maybe not yet, let's leave that for now, but it's definitely way too big. It looks like shit, so I'm gonna scale it down a little bit, and then just extrude it inwards a little bit to give it some thickness. After that, you extrude it outwards like this. We need a knife cut from this point here to this point right here, and the same thing on the other side, because that's going to allow us to take this face segment over here at the top and extrude it over here. You're gonna want the same thing at the bottom, so my solution is just deleting the bottom half, then copying the top half, scaling it to -1 on the z-axis. And now once we do that, we get this little triangle on the inside here, and we also get an n-gon on this part. So to fix a triangle, we could just add a loop cut like this that gives us little quads up here. And to fix the n-gon, I don't know what we're gonna do. I'm thinking maybe we add an extra segment here, we join this with J, then we join this with J, and the same thing over here on the other side, because that allows us to take this segment and slide it backwards, and now we have all quads. Same thing at the top, same thing on the other side with the loop cut thing. And at the end, I want to make these little circles here because I have no desire to work on this bumpy area right now. I don't want to do that shit at all, especially since the idea is that I'm supposed to keep clean topology in this video, so fuck that. How about I challenge Thomas Collin to do that? So if Thomas Collin sees this video, I'm not even going to challenge him, I'm just going to politely invite him if he's willing to do that. I would be interested in seeing that. If anybody else is interested in seeing that, then let us know down in the comments. Anyway, I want 3 loop cuts on this surface here. I'm going to bevel them a little bit, and then I'm just going to extrude them outwards, and there you go. There's my little piece for that. So at this point, my job is just to connect some of these inner parts over here, maybe make some more surfaces down at the bottom. I don't think there's anything left to show here which is really interesting, so the rest is just going to be repetitive if I keep on filming. This video is probably already long as fuck, so I'm going to cut the camera right here. That's the end of it. Let me know down in the comments if I missed something, if you want me to answer some questions. Also, make sure to check out the fucking Blender Masterclass course. Also, make sure to check out the free topology guide, which is going to be down in the description. And if you guys want to see more hard surface modeling, kind of like I'm doing in this video, then go check out my Patreon page where I'm doing a full car modeling course. I'm making an Aston Martin DBS Superleggera from scratch. That's it. Like the video, subscribe to the fucking channel. Let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next one.